Now, when a show runs for the course of 11 seasons or 12 years, they have quite a long time to flesh out a vast array of characters, and today I wanted to delve into those characters throughout the 11 seasons of The Walking Dead and say who my favourite character is from each specific season. I will also be giving out some honourable mentions for characters who I think just missed the mark, but still shine tremendously in that season. But with that being said, let's kick it off with Season 1. Now, Season 1 of The Walking Dead is by far the shortest season, coming in at only 6 episodes, meaning there's only a few real contenders here. Firstly, Morgan Jones. He was, for a period of time, the greatest one-time character in the whole show, and what I mean by that is, up until Season 3, he only appeared in a singular episode. Morgan does a phenomenal job at not just introducing us to the world, but also Rick Grimes, and his dynamic with Dwayne is heartwarming, but his whole situation is incredibly tragic. It's the way his wife wanders outside the house him and Dwayne inhabit now, but he's just unable to bring himself to put her down, which of course will eventually cost him his son's life later down the line, but this gave us as the viewers an inkling to how life might be in this new world. But overall, Morgan is a superb character. His dynamic with Rick is brilliant, and for the one episode he appears in, he does a great job at setting up the foundations of what would become the whole show. Glenn, T-Dog and Dale are all awesome in Season 1 as well, and a moment I like about each of them is Glenn saving Rick and just the comedic value he brings to the group in general, T-Dog for his lighter hearted moments, willingness to help our survivors, and finally his dynamic with Merle, which poses us the first real ethical question in the whole series. And finally Dale, pretty much for that delightful and incredibly touching speech around the campfire centered around his watch. It really is one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire show. However, the winner here is quite clearly Rick Grimes. Right from the open, we as the viewers have just as much of an idea of what's going on in the world as Rick does, and we slowly learn the horrors of the new world through the incredibly atmospheric and tense pilot episode. After this, we get the iconic camp scene where Carl, Laurie and Rick reunite, which is enough to make a grown man cry, and we also see him discover how to walk amongst the dead by covering up your scent. But the cherry on top of all of this is the now frayed friendship of himself and Shane. Rick is so engaging here, and his strong sense of morality we see start to be tested in this chaotic world. He's the perfect mix of heroism, vulnerability and grit, and he set the tempo for the future seasons. He just shines through here, which is why he's my favourite character from Season 1. Now, all you Shane fans, don't worry, your time will come. Season 2 for me is probably the trickiest season to rank from this entire list, purely down to how the season slows right down from the zombie and horror style action and puts a real emphasis on character driven storylines. So many characters are phenomenal in this season. Dale and Glenn are once again superb, Daryl starts to come out of his shell and become a real member of the group, which is demonstrated perfectly by his constant pursuit of Sophia. Herschel is just amazing, an educated man who slowly comes to the realization that things are a lot worse than he originally thought, portrayed perfectly by the late Scott Wilson, rest in peace, and Rick once again is phenomenal, but you'll see that will become a bit of a running theme throughout this list. But it is of course Shane Walsh who comes out on top for me here on Season 2. I think the whole Rick and Shane dynamic is what makes this season my favourite in the entire show, and John Bernthal just portrays this gradual descent into madness so well. Throughout the 13 episodes of Season 2, we see Shane evolve. Whilst Rick is still clinging to the morality of the old world, Shane understands that the old rules don't apply anymore. He kills Otis, he wants to call off the search for Sophia, and he overall just causes havoc at the farm. The juxtaposition of Dale as a character shows the two completely different mindsets, and Shane would come out on top, outliving this counterpart, albeit not for very long. But the arguments between these two characters were just iconic. And don't even get me started on Rick and Shane. It's pure cinema. He's the first true antagonist we see in the whole show, but unlike other villains, Shane's not entirely evil. He poses the question of what's right and wrong, and watching the former friends and contrasting views of Rick and Shane bubble over into a deadly standoff was just peak television for me. Shane made the show so intense, And some of the standout scenes for me here are his back and forth with Dale about executing Randall, the scene of him shaving his head after killing Otis, and of course his final showdown between himself and Rick. So yeah, for me, Shane is the best character of Season 2. Season 3, again, is a very hard one for me, as there are just so many new characters introduced. Glenn starts to become a more hardened survivor, as we see him dispatch that walker whilst being held captive in Woodbury. Merle returns and gives us so much tension, as he was so unpredictable, but ultimately had one of the best redemption moments in the whole show. Michonne was just awesome with her katana. Herschel again is another highlight of this season for me, as even though our survivors encounter worse and worse people, he remains that source of wisdom and optimism in a very bleak world. Rick's descent into delusion and battle with grief was heartbreaking to watch, symbolised by the imaginary phone call with all the people he'd lost in his journey so far. And of course we have the Governor. He's the first true villain with no redeeming factors. He's scary, ruthless, and extremely well written. And he's not your typical villain. He's charismatic and charming, but underneath it all lie a true monster. The war between Woodbury and our survivors had many sacrifices and felt so engaging, and he just raises the stakes of the show altogether, whilst demonstrating perfectly the real danger in this world isn't the walkers, but it's the other survivors, as he encapsulates the inherent evil inside humankind. But cook me all you want, the Governor is coming in second for me. The best character in Season 3, in my opinion, is Daryl Dixon. Now, obviously, the Governor is one of the best villains in fiction, full stop. But this for me might be Daryl's best season throughout the whole show. He shines so much here. We see him and Rick have grown into a formidable duo, and after Laurie's death he keeps everyone together. His and Carl's relationship strengthens as he almost becomes an uncle to him, sharing the story of how his mother died as the two start to trauma bond. And in general this season he just really opens up as we see a totally different side to Daryl. We see him and Carol start to blossom into the iconic duo they would become, the heartbreak of finding Merle then losing him so soon after, the dilemma of choosing blood over your newfound family, ultimately outgrowing Merle's toxic influence and standing up to him for the first time, and also just the way he looks after Judith. He really kept the group together here in an extremely dark time, and I think he's super underrated for just how good he is in Season 3. On top of all of this, he's Daryl Dixon, so he does all of this whilst looking incredibly cool. But ultimately, Daryl Dixon is the glue that held everyone together in this season, and I'm so happy they further developed his character from Season 2. I mean, it's just seamless. So yeah, for me, Daryl Dixon is the best character in Season 3, and Norman Reedus does a phenomenal job here. After the prison falls in Season 4, our group scatter, and we get some really interesting dynamics here. A perfect example of this is Daryl and Beth. The newfound optimism of Beth mixed with the more pessimistic mindset of Daryl works incredibly well, and we learn more about Beth in a 4-episode span than we had in the previous 3 seasons. I also want to shout out Carl here, because in truth it's weird for him. He finishes off Season 3 and starts off Season 4 incredibly strong, and I think the character is very overlooked in this span. However, towards the end of Season 4, his whole dynamic with Rick and being annoyed at him I found not only puzzling, because like what more do you want the man to do, but also kind of annoying. However, that being said, I do really enjoy his friendship with Michonne, and I think it's very heartwarming. Herschel, again, like I've said for the last few seasons, is great in this season, because ultimately Herschel is Mr. Consistent, but he gets his head chopped off in this season, so this will be the last we're mentioning him. And although the Governor is good in Season 4, I find some of the episodes centered around him a tad bit boring, so I'm going to have to rule him out for the best character here. The last two I want to shout out here are Tyrese and Carol. These are two characters who benefited tremendously from the group splitting up after the fall of the prison, and the two of them go through a hell of a lot together. The whole Lizzie situation is probably the most brutal episode in the entire show, and the way Tyrese not only forgives Carol, but also protects Judith, cemented him as one of my favourite characters in the whole show. And then there's Carol. Her evolution speaks for itself. She becomes quite the force to be reckoned with in Season 4, however, once again, Officer Friendly takes my top spot here. Okay, call me basic all you want, but was there any other choice? Rick not only has the iconic speech pleading for the Governor to spare Herschel, which ultimately comes to no avail, but this subsequently flips a switch in Rick, and Murder Jacket Rick is born. He escapes the brink of death, he bites Joe's throat out, he leads the group into Terminus, then susses them out straight away. It's just pure cinema. Rick's transformation is in full swing here, and the final line of season 4, delivered by Rick, is arguably one of the best in television history. That line, of course, being,
"They're with the wrong people."
But overall, Rick is just superb in season 4. He will do anything to protect his family, and it's this version of Rick which stands right on the line of morality that make his character so iconic. He's almost shedding his past tendencies and is now fully embracing the chaos of this new world. Okay, season 5, once again, is fairly easy, but let me just highlight some other standout characters from season 5 for me, before we get to the obvious choice here. Bob Stuckey is brilliant and I loved his relationship with Sasha, but then again, who doesn't love Bob Stuckey? Abraham is great in this season, albeit a bit hard-headed. Carl, once again, I think is very underrated and shows us some pretty solid character progression here. Maggie and Daryl are great. And who can forget the heartbreaking scene of Daryl carrying out Beth's lifeless body to Maggie. Carol is now basically the Apocalypse's answer to John Wick, and Gareth makes an incredibly unsettling villain, offering us a new type of horror, that being cannibalism. Now, you probably thought because I'm a YouTuber I'd give some profound argument to some underrated character as to why they're my favourite in season 5. But no, this is just prime Rick Grimes we are talking about. No one is lifting a finger to him. He's become cold and calculated and morphed into a survival machine. He's officially dropped the illusion of the old world, and his only focus is now protecting the ones he loves. After our group's escape from Terminus, he tries to turn around and slaughter every single survivor. He keeps his promise to Gareth by brutally murdering him with his red-handled machete in a church of all places. Then his conflict with Pete ending the season in his cold execution of the man that was witnessed by the returning Morgan Jones, showing us all just how much Rick's changed, is just perfection. And Andrew Lincoln completely kills this role. It's the most dangerous, ruthless, and confident we will ever see Rick. And that's what makes it so damn good. Rick is the only reason our group make it to Alexandria alive, and the contrast between our now hardened survivors and the Alexandrians make us as the viewers realise how much everybody's changed. And there is a reason this is the fan favourite season of the series, and it largely comes down to Rick. This is Rick Grimes' world and everybody else is just living in it. So yeah, for me, Rick is the best character in season 5. Season 6, we see our survivors start to take over Alexandria as they integrate into that society. I think Glenn is really good in season 6, and his fake out death is probably the only blemish for him here. But his relationship with Noah and then Nicholas was great to watch, and it was nice to see him beat the living hell out of Nicholas, as well as his and Maggie's relationship continuing to be the emotional core of the show. Daryl once again is superb as he gets the rocket launcher kill on those saviors, but also has this internal battle of mercy as he ultimately decides to let Dwight live. Abraham finds a new lease in life with Sasha, and Michonne is again brilliant, as well as Aaron getting fleshed out, which I really enjoyed. But season 6, once again, has to go to Rick. However, this time it's a lot less of a landslide. But that being said, No Way Out is still one of the best episodes in the whole show, and after Carl is shot, he goes berserk and starts slaughtering walkers for fun. The "we have to control who lives here" speech is just gold, and him and Michonne finally get together. And also just watching this man's pure rage against the saviors was just great TV, even if he would probably live to regret it. Now, I'm fully aware Rick has been my favourite character for the last 3 seasons, but you just can't argue with peak fiction. However, I would like to also shout out Jesus in this season. His entry into the show felt organic, and the chase scene between him, Rick and Daryl is just comedy gold. So, for the last couple of seasons, I've left my summaries rather short, mainly due to the fact that Rick Grimes has won all of them, and that's because largely he's winning for the same reasons over and over again. But season 7, in my opinion, is probably the worst version of Rick in the entire show. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still Rick Grimes, so he's still a good character, but he's nowhere near the top for me here. Rosita starts to shine as her and Sasha squash their beef, bonding over their joint hatred of Negan. Simon makes a menacing and frightening second-hand man to Negan. There's a tiger named Shiva, so just based on the fact Shiva's a tiger, it makes this list alone. And Daryl probably has his strongest season since season 3. He is just brilliant here. The scene after Negan's tortured him and he asks him who he is, with his response being Daryl, and his reunion with Rick at Hilltop, this is just peak Daryl Dixon. We see him live with the regret of basically getting Glenn killed, and he is one of the leading pioneers in fighting back against the Saviors, and I just love him for it. But the number one spot here is of course Negan. His entrance is just insane, and we've never seen someone mentally break Rick in the way Negan was able to do. I mean, he had Rick ready to cut off his own son's arm. Rick had got far too comfortable in the apocalypse, and Negan was a rude awakening to bring his ego right back down to earth. On top of this, he's not just a sadistic killer, but is also a charming and funny man, making him so entertaining to watch. And his one-liners are just iconic. His psychological warfare and his manipulation are just so devious. He turns communities into fear-driven colonies. And for me, he was the first villain in the show that felt truly untouchable for a period of time. And if you mix all of what I just said with a touch of complexity and backstory, you pretty much get the perfect villain. And Jeffrey Dean Morgan hits this one out of the park, pun intended. Now, season 8 of the show should have probably been the peak of The Walking Dead, but it just kind of isn't. And although in my opinion the season as a whole is kind of underwhelming, we do get some really good moments. First of all, Gabriel finally gets some screen time, and boy does he make the most of it, obviously losing his sight in one eye and trying to kill Negan himself. Dwight is really good in season 8, and I enjoyed how he became the inside man for our saviors, eventually being spared by Daryl. And speaking of Daryl, he's again very solid, and I loved watching him and Rick take down savior outposts all by themselves, even coming back into contact with Morales. Carl, before receiving probably the worst death in television history, was very good, especially I thought at leading Alexandria in the absence of Rick, who was on a revenge path. And it just showed the potential of Carl leading a community, which is a shame because we never really got to see it. And again, Simon really steps up from what was already a great season 7, as we realise he's probably worse than Negan, and I enjoyed the internal struggle for power between himself and Negan. But again, this season has to either go to Rick or Negan. They are both hellbent on killing one another in this season, and it's a clash of the titans. Neither of them are backing down, and if you take Negan's humour and mix it with Rick's sternness, you get one of the best dynamics in the show, and it could have gone to either one of them. But again, I'm gonna have to give it to Rick, based on the walkie-talkie call after Carl's death where he swears he's going to kill Negan, the Saviour Outpost slayings with Daryl that I mentioned before, the scene straight out of Fast and Furious where Rick rams into Negan's convoy and chases him into a burning building, and of course the infamous speech to all of the communities after sparing Negan's life. It really is a beautiful moment as he tries to honour his late son's wishes. And I would also like to take a moment to shout out King Ezekiel and Jerry. But yeah, for the 5th time in 8 seasons, Rick wins. I mean, there's a reason I made a video about him being the best character in fiction, so did you really expect anything else? Season 9 of The Walking Dead sees a major time jump and the departure of Rick Grimes, so now you can all calm down about me putting him at number 1 for everything. In all seriousness though, Rick's departure is up there with one of the saddest moments from the entire show, and seeing an onlooking Daryl brought to tears as Rick blows up the bridge is incredibly powerful. And it makes you realise just how far we've come. We are a world away from Daryl and Rick squaring up at the Atlantic camp in season 1, and the look Rick gives Daryl after shooting a walker that's chasing him on the bridge is just soul destroying. Seeing the post-apocalyptic duo that many of us grew up watching torn apart is always going to evoke immense emotions. And Daryl feels somewhat responsible for Rick's presumed death, as we see Daryl start to live in isolation, almost punishing himself for what unfolded that day. On top of this, he gets a dog which suits the character to a T, but overall Daryl is very solid in season 9. Judith is now grown up, and her relationship with the now not so evil Negan is weirdly wholesome, and a dynamic I found myself really enjoying throughout season 9. But the winner of my favourite character of season 9 is Rick. Okay, I'm joking, it's Beta. Now, Alpha is also really good, and she comes in a close second as they present a unique type of villain, and for me genuinely brought back the fear factor to the show, something which in my opinion hadn't been present since season 3. But for me, I just prefer Beta a little bit more. He feels so incredibly imposing, and every time he was on screen, I just felt like someone was going to die. The man is a complete psychopath and acts as the muscle for Alpha, and although we see him fleshed out more in season 10, he has some great moments in season 9 as well. For example, his fight with Daryl, and the backstory on how he met Alpha. And it's this loyalty to Alpha which make him even scarier, as he would stop at nothing to protect her. And as a whole, I love the way the Whisperers were introduced as an antagonist group, killing off Jesus in that spooky graveyard scene. It was a death that felt like it had meaning and genuinely shocked me when I first saw the show. And all round, the Whisperers just brought a breath of fresh air to the series, which I will always be thankful for, even if their welcome does become slightly overdue going into season 10. Like previously mentioned, for me, the Whisperer War becomes far too drawn out and overstays its welcome in the series. And although this is the case, I still do think Beta and Alpha are really good in season 10. Michonne departs the show to look for Rick, which for me is a massive shame because Michonne was one of my favourites, and Daryl is basically forced to step up in her absence. His friendship with Carol is tested like we've never seen before, and on top of this he gets an interesting dynamic with one of the newer characters, that being Connie, which I enjoyed watching unfold. On top of this, I really enjoyed Aaron and Gabriel's friendship as they start to gain more screen time, and it's a really underrated dynamic within the series. But for me, the best character in season 10 is Negan. It's the quote-unquote redemption arc of the former villain, and Negan killing Alpha was extremely satisfying, and I also thought it was quite unexpected when it was airing at the time. His mentorship with Lydia, consoling her and expressing how he also feels like an outcast in the community, was a really nice touch, and also his friendship with Judith again shines through here. The tension of Maggie's return sets up for future storylines, and when him and Daryl work together against the Whisperers, it's undeniably cool. On top of this, he keeps his charisma and charm, and I actually found it very funny when he was interacting with characters like Beta, who were so stern and solemn, as he was just cracking jokes. And it was a dynamic that made me laugh. And it's also a nice nod back to the episode Here's Lucille, as Negan recognises the former country singer Beta as he's demasked. His wife is even wearing some of his merch in the flashback. Not only does it reinforce Beta's backstory, but it's a nice touch onto Negan's as well. So for me, Negan is the best character in season 10 of The Walking Dead. Season 11 of the show sees us introduced to the Commonwealth, a corrupt and classist community that somewhat resembles life from the pre-apocalypse. Maggie Rhee takes a break from being rather unbearable in the later seasons of the show, as I actually enjoyed her relationship with Negan, for the most part. It does get overdone a little bit though. Carol plays a crucial role in overthrowing Pamela Milton, and is a return to form for her character, as I found her rather annoying throughout the whole Whisperer War. Mercer I thought was a great addition to the show, and King Ezekiel is again very solid in season 11. Once again, Daryl is really good. I enjoyed him being forced to kill his former companion Leia, and the whole storyline centered around the Reapers. On top of this, his and Judith's relationship is incredibly touching, but he doesn't make the top 2 for me, and that top 2 is Gabriel and Rosita. Gabriel at this point in the show has completed his transformation into a post-apocalyptic beast, and he's a world away from the nervous wreck we saw in season 5. And that truly iconic sniper scene at the start of season 11 is probably my favourite scene from the whole of season 11. But for me, it has to go to Rosita. From start to finish, she proves how lethal she is at combat. Her love for her daughter Coco is the driving force for her motivations in this season, and I just think she steals the show. Rosita's death in the final episode is tragic, but also beautiful in a very strange way, as we say goodbye to one of the longest serving characters on the show. Rosita started off as just Abraham's girlfriend, but by season 11 she's so much more. She was compassionate and strong, and I'm glad we got to see her take up a larger leadership role in the final season. So for me, Rosita is the best character from season 11. But with that being said, that is my favourite character from every single season of The Walking Dead. Now I'm fully aware most of these are extremely generic, but what do you want me to do? Come on here and lie? And if you guys have any other different opinions, please do let me know down below in the comments, as I would love to hear them. If you enjoyed today's video, please do like and subscribe, as we are only 993,000 subscribers off 1 million. So please do subscribe, we are so close. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.